Hi, everybody. I don't want this channel to be only negative. It's pretty easy when Brendan Schaub is a topic, but I want to do something a little more positive. I'm going to talk about the Pete and Sebastian show. It's a comedy podcast hosted by Pete Correale and Sebastian Maniscalco. And they really just talk about the nuances and ups and downs of their everyday life. And it's really a pleasant listen. There's some podcasts out there that are just, it's almost like what made podcasts great in the first place, that they're less manufactured, they're more like real. And this podcast really fits that description, I think. I first found this podcast when, the whole pandemic thing was going on. Things were pretty dark and touch and go for a good period of time there. And when I found this podcast, it was just nice to have like it wasn't even like real human interaction, but it was like close, you know. I was listening to it pretty good amount, and then the pandemic sort of went away, and I think this was like a pretty widespread situation where when we were on like real lockdown, people turned to podcasts, and there was definitely like a podcast boom at the time. But then once things started to change after a period of time, and then the podcast bubble sort of burst. So anyway, that's how I found the podcast. So to get started on what makes this podcast good and different from the others, first, they are underrated, but that's by design almost. They've gone on record saying they don't advertise, and that's unlike pretty much every other podcast out there. And when I say advertise, there's a couple forms, like actual advertisements, like ones that you would pay for. And then the other one is the thing where the podcast host just like goes, it's like there's like a group of podcast hosts, and they all just go on each other's podcasts, and that's like advertising, which is fine. I'm not saying that's like a negative or you shouldn't do that or anything, but the fact that these guys pretty explicitly don't do that, or at least I should say they weren't doing that, it makes it more niche. Like the idea of advertising their podcast in a vacuum doesn't really matter, but I think it's more a sign of what they want out of the podcast. Like they're not looking to have this giant podcast that everybody in the whole world listens to. It's more like they're just friends catching up with stuff and, riffing with each other and, enjoying each other's company. And there's a decent audience. It's definitely not bad. It's enough where they get sponsors and deals and all that kind of thing. So I think the audience size is a win-win for everybody. And sort of along the same lines, they aren't trying to hit the YouTube algorithm. A lot of podcasts definitely try and do this where they'll find, like the hot button topic, whatever it is at the time, whether it's Jake Paul did something or I don't know, like anything, there's clearly like a YouTube algorithm where things get inflated, like stories get not artificially pushed, but because the algorithm sees like, oh well, everybody's looking at videos on Jake Paul, I'll just use him as an example. So then YouTube starts then pushing the videos, and then it like compounds on itself. They don't do the thing where, or at least they weren't, where clips sort of along the same lines as they aren't going out of their way to advertise. They're also not going out of their way to hit the YouTube algorithm. And a lot of podcasts are guilty of that. And that it is another thing where it's not inherently bad, but you can tell some podcasts fall into the trap where they're just trying to get the next viral clip. Like there's a couple examples I could use. The the one I will use is the infamous Bert Kreischer laugh, and he's gone on record for the laugh itself, but he's definitely gone on record saying, like, well, I did this thing and it got much more views than normal. So I'm just going to keep doing this thing because it gets views. And what happens is then like whatever made it initially funny at the time, well, then it's just like it's like it makes it feel fake, because then it's, if you even admit that, are you doing it because that's how you genuinely are or feel, or are you now just like a caricature to get views? And once it gets to that point, then it's like you can't like relate to him as much because it feels like you're watching reality TV show instead of hanging out with a friend. Okay. So speaking of Bert Kreischer, it actually leads into this next point pretty well. These guys are famous while still being very relatable. I guess Sebastian is on a slightly higher level of fame than Pete is. I mean, not that it's a competition or anything, but it is interesting. I mean, it almost makes it better in a way because then they both relate to that situation differently, and they're both very honest about it, which is nice. Because one of the big issues that happens on these podcasts, probably inherently a stand-up comedian thing, where it's very easy to get an inflated ego or heavily embellish your situation in an effort to get more fame. Because when you're a stand-up comedian, I imagine more fame equals more money. But these guys clearly aren't in the podcast game just to contribute to their fame level, if that makes sense. I'm sure whatever extra fame they've gotten from the podcast, they're not going to complain about, but they're just very genuine and honest about their situations, and they also talk about them in a way that's funny. And I have an example for this one where Sebastian, he's talking about his fame, and he gives an example that he was at a restaurant, and there was a paparazzi guy there, and he knew who Sebastian was, and he wasn't sure if he should even bother taking pictures of him. And then I guess he did, and then Sebastian did some like Sebastian was jokingly treating him like a personal photographer, and it was pretty funny. Here's the clip.
And he recognizes me, and it was like, if I was him, he was like, I don't know, maybe it's worth some money. I don't know. Let me just get it. Let me just get him, just in case someone. Right? So there's people waiting for the valet, right? And I'm getting flashed up. So I go, it's about time. I've been waiting for this moment, right? I'm giving the guy all he needs. You know, like some people go in the car like that, like this. I'm out there. I get it. Take it. Right? This
You're like,
might
can I give you an email? Can you send me some of the...
Bro, this is we asked the paparazzi to take our photo with our camera of the group that I went to dinner with.
Okay, so that was the clip. And moving over to Pete, it's interesting hearing him talk about, he talks quite a bit about him and his wife and the little quibble debates they get into. I guess it was on the last podcast. He told a story about a snowblower and the snowblower wasn't starting, so he took it to get fixed, and they didn't fix it, but they got a workaround. But when he was driving the snowblower back, it fell out of his trailer, and then when he got it back to the house, he wasn't sure if he should tell his wife. When it fell out of the trailer, something else broke. Like he wasn't sure if he should tell her the truth on that or just skip over it or go, quote unquote, forget to tell her, that kind of thing. And I'm not doing the story justice because it was pretty funny and there were many twists and turns and ups and downs in it. But it's like hearing that kind of story, that's maybe not exactly that kind of thing, but every couple has stories that are just like that. It's like where you're one of you is trying to do the right thing and it doesn't quite work out and something happens, and then it's like, how do you respond to the bad thing that happened? So it's just like a nice listen. They don't go over the top with the stories they're trying to tell, and yeah, it's just like very honest, and they're very funny, and there's no game they're trying to play in the whole like podcast sphere, unlike many other podcasts out there. So from Biff Buffington, they get a resounding 2 thumbs up. So they should be proud that a YouTube channel with 10 subscribers that are all myself, gives them a thumbs up. They should be very proud of that. Okay, so that's the video for today. Yeah, whatever you want to do, like, subscribe, thumbs up, comments. If anybody real out there is actually listening to this, please drop a comment. It would be nice. It's very motivating to see when somebody leaves real comments. So if you could do that, that'd be great. All right, guys, I'm out of here. See you next time.